Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. This is the place where we connect the dots of TV and feminism to American culture and politics. Welcome, TV Herstorians. We've got a fun one today, and it's fun because we're talking about comedy. Now, if you've been a long-time listener of Advanced TV Herstory, maybe you go all the way back to when I did the really important episode on Lucille Ball. That's who a lot of people think of when you think of TV comedy, right? There's more. I did Designing Women. I've talked to Margaret Cho, and that was really important as well because Margaret brought along the racial element of what it means to do TV comedy. So here we are today with Lynn Harris of Gold Comedy, who I'm guessing knows all of the secrets. She has the sauce recipe, and she's waiting to share it with us. So without further ado, let me just jump into helping us understand who Lynn Harris is and what Gold Comedy does in the field of comedy. And TV listeners, think about this. Comedy is everything from the person who wrote the script to perhaps the showrunner who is very smart and has that timing and understanding. Then there's the Betty White, the person who can deliver a line just the way it needs to be, as well as when we think of stand-up and, that whole Seinfeld thing, which was kind of meta when you think about it, and that is a TV show about a stand-up. So, Lynn Harris, help us unravel all of this. Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory.
To manage expectations, I have some of the secrets.
The ones you give away for free. How's that? So how does one become a development professional? Is that kind of what you do?
It's a bit of a dream of mine to be involved in developing. And I'm beginning to realize that dream through how Gold Comedy is developing. What I mean is Gold Comedy is the comedy school and professional network and content studio. That's sort of the development piece where women and non-binary creators build their comedy careers and join a powerful network and make funny stuff. We create opportunities for our members to level up their stand-up game, certainly to work on improv, but also to create web series, digital sketches, and concrete assets, if you will, like that. Also to learn how to pitch their TV or film ideas. And so we are able to, if nothing else, nurture those ideas with them, but also in some cases, we are able to help them develop them and get them distributed. So it's not a traditional development role, but we talk to development people and we work with development people and we're able to bring in members, help them find collaboration, help them learn how to develop their own content, and then help them find it a place in the world. We're super creator friendly. We don't own anyone's content. We bring on anywhere from 8 to 13 teams to make podcast or web series content, and they become part of the Gold universe. And in some of those cases, and we can talk about this more, but in some of those cases, we've been able to connect them to distribution through newly evolved types of channels. And even in those cases where we're the intermediary and we do have a stake in their content, we still make very clear that this is your content, that you're giving us the license to be an intermediary to help connect you to distributors. So it's a nice model where we're involved in the creative and the distribution parts of it, but it's still the creator's content.
Is it kind of a small world where it's, 1,000 people who all know each other?
You do find that a lot of people know each other. Part of what we offer in our community is that we have a guest every Wednesday who comes and talks to our members. They could be a celebrity. We've had Margaret Cho. They could be people who work behind the scenes that you are with jobs that you didn't even know it was a job and now you want that job. And the list of people that we've had one person a week for years. And the list of people that we have scheduled ahead or that we're going to reach out to or that are reaching out to us is endless. There are so many people involved in so many aspects of creating and delivering comedy to us. And by the way, I'm speaking not entirely, but like mostly about women and non-binary creators. So there's just a ton of us out there, which is fantastic.
It is. We need people who are making us laugh or laugh at ourselves or whatever more than ever, as we know. When we think about TV, and I think it'll be fun for you to interject your experience as well as the work of Gold Comedy into some of these examples that we're going to talk about. Listeners, we're going to take you all the way back to those pioneers, not just the Lucille Balls, because she gets a lot of attention, but there were some really important women who were models, who were representation for the Lynn Harrises of the world. We're going to talk about them because they're really important. Then Saturday Night Live, as well as Second City TV. So kind of that whole probably 40 years worth of talent building and what they have produced, because that was to some degree more a part of the second wave of feminism. Then we have this current batch that's where Lynn's finger is on the pulse. And this new batch is not just of talent, but of the creators of opportunity and the writers. So it's really going to be kind of cool. Let's jump in. And when I think about early comedians, and I did poll, I was out there on Facebook and on Instagram, Blue Sky, asking who comes to mind when you think of the funniest person. A lot of people had to say Betty White, but I don't even think Betty White is a pioneer. When I think of comedy, I think of the stand-ups, those early stand-ups of Toady Fields and Joan Rivers and Phyllis Diller. Am I missing anybody, Lynn?
No shade, but yes. You hit. I'm glad you mentioned Toady Fields because she often doesn't get mentioned in this crowd. But there's also Moms Mabley, who often doesn't get mentioned. Not your fault, but often doesn't get mentioned because she wasn't white.
Was she on TV?
She was. She's really considered the grandma of all these people, and I don't mean anything about her age, but she was. She started out in theater in the 1920s, and she really developed it into stand-up. But she really kind of was, because of the way things were, she really came up in Black vaudeville. So she did finally make her way up to like Ed Sullivan and Smothers Brothers. But of course, she didn't, for very obvious reasons, didn't get the same attention and credit, but she developed the art as much as anybody else.
And she gets mentioned actually in Mrs. Maisel, right?
Yeah. We can do a whole side note on Mrs. Maisel, but you want me to do it? I'll do it. Love Mrs. Maisel, especially the outfits. But I think if I had a nickel for every time someone said to me, and you didn't do this, but if I had a nickel for every time someone said to me, "Oh, you're a woman in comedy, you must have seen Mrs. Maisel," I want to say we don't have enough shows about women in comedy, because that show is about women and it's about comedy, but it's not really. Like women in comedy are in the story, but it's not actually about the experience of women in comedy, like not at all. Does that make it a bad show? No. Does that make me enjoy the outfits any less? It does not. But the show that's about women in comedy and about the comedy business is Hacks. But they do. You're right. They do mention Moms Mabley.
Joan Rivers is now who I consider to be the premier reinventor, and died way too soon. But she was able to sort of transcend the stand-up aspect and deliver her great jokes and her wit in so many different fashions.
Yeah.
When we think of those pioneers, they weren't the writers. The Mary Tyler Moore Show had women in the writer's room. And obviously there were some other very talented women from the 60s who were doing comedy on TV, Mary Tyler Moore herself. The thing I think about when I've read about Phyllis Diller and all of these women is that they took care of the people who supported them. They took care of the hotel staffs that they interacted with, and they made their immediate staff work really, really hard. But they treated them well, because you kind of needed that level of loyalty to succeed and to navigate and to be on time, because the scrutiny was on them, just as people of color feeling like they had to absolutely deliver. They could not risk an error. And they were, to some degree, excluded from Saturday Night Live, which, celebrates its 50th anniversary this year, but really opened the door. Call it second wave feminism, call it Title IX and the ERA and the boost. But when those women landed on Saturday Night Live, Jane Curtin and Gilda Radner, who we just did an episode about, and Lorraine Newman, they landed on TV at the same time that during primetime, we also saw a lot of women. What do you think their legacy is? Saturday Night Live, starting with those three women and producing a Tina Fey and an Amy Poehler and a Maya Rudolph.
Well, it's been complicated. We all know that SNL has struggled to have women in charge. It took them a while to have a Black woman, and then the first one wasn't even a regular. She was featured, but not a regular. And we all know books have been written about, like, there were women on staff like the whole time, but books have been written about how they were sidelined, about how they were, their jokes didn't make it on, their sketches didn't make it on the show, about how they were treated. But what's great about SNL has been great for women as well. And that is they create breakout characters. even starting with when you were talking about Gilda Radner, who I know you just talked about, the Gilda Radner characters that broke out, that actually people still quote, when they broke out, they weren't thought of as female characters breaking out. And I'm linking this to like when I was raised on, the Carol Burnett show, Laugh-In. I didn't think of those comics as female comics. I just thought of them as comics. They really were positioned that way. Carol Burnett was not a show for the ladies. She was just Carol Burnett. And so setting aside all of the bad stuff, SNL has really succeeded in just as well by its women and their breakout characters by turning them into stars. That pipeline has been good for women as well, even if Debbie Downer, didn't get her own movie. And so I feel like they've given women that and sort of equal opportunity to have that breakout, to have those breakout opportunities. That's one thing that I think is part of the legacy or the ongoing legacy. And it's still happening.
We can kind of look at this big group of the last, say, 35 years. Once sort of all of those ceilings were broken, the glass ceilings, the opportunity, all of a sudden there were certainly more sitcoms that were led by women who were in stand-up, Margaret Cho being one. Chelsea Handler had an evening show or a late night show. Wanda Sykes is the Joan Rivers of today, it feels like. She's available to be an MC. She's available to helm a talk show. She's that well-versed in just knowing her audience and being able to present good material. Rosie O'Donnell, didn't she actually get her start in stand-up?
Thinking about Ellen also. I used to have this like battered old VHS tape, a compilation of women comics who were known then only as stand-ups because they were like doing pretty well as stand-ups, but they hadn't broken past that. And one of them was Ellen DeGeneres, just doing stand-up. And that's where she came from, leading to her own show, leading to like actually big changes in culture. Like her coming out on her show was actually a big deal in a good way. I mean, it was controversial. It sounds quaint now, but to have, a then, really sort of beloved mainstream white, sort of palatable, if you will, likable character do that actually created air cover for a lot of other cultural changes, even though it's funny to think that it was controversial at the time. She was hardly the first gay character, but it was a proxy, obviously, for her in real life. That's my speech about Ellen. So comedy really can also be I don't want to say Trojan horse, but a good delivery system for culture change.
Absolutely. And the other work I'm doing apart from the podcast is this deep research into life before SVU and the early depictions of a quid pro quo situation. And I use that and sort of Toxic Workplace as the non-violent, where it's a civil matter, not a criminal matter. We're able to trace it back to a That Girl episode, which I did a podcast episode about. And Marlo Thomas was so powerful and she knew how to use her power. Between her and the way Jane Fonda introduces the original 9 to 5 in 1980, they felt it was important to introduce some of these matters of social change under, as Jane calls it, the soft mantle of comedy. That was the way to get it in front of people's faces in a way that was not threatening, men and women both. And that presumably is part of the genius of Saturday Night Live is they are doing it to a very distinct audience. They recognize who their demographic is, but also what they're thinking. We're so caught up in our own lives and consuming what is being presented to us. We kind of forget who's thinking about it and who is going to deliver it. And so I'm grateful that you're sort of helping us think about this because we expect, as feminists, we expect Tina Fey and Maya Rudolph and Wanda Sykes and even, Queen Latifah and Kim Fields. I mean, they all have that talent. Right now, they are delivering projects using very different titles. They are no longer necessarily the funny person, but in fact, they are now the person in power.
And they can also still be both. Like Tina Fey is, and she can also still be both.
The difference, where we are in that incredible class of women that is now, it spans kind of 35, 40 years. Julia Louis-Dreyfus, throw her in. They recognize that they have power and they're doing it. I mean, they're leveraging it. And probably more than we know, they still have to work. They are not getting the contracts that the men in their field get.
That is very true. I mean, I think I'm going to get this quote wrong, but Tina Fey said something like, How are things for women in comedy? They're terrible. We're visible, but I'm paraphrasing. I'm totally paraphrasing. But we're still working twice as hard to get paid half as much. And that's Tina Fey. You're right. No matter how many women are absolutely a million times more visible, a million times is a strong statement, but are more visible than they used to be, more powerful than they used to be. Women can be Ghostbusters now, but you also have to wonder how many quit. How many were just like, this is too hard. The only way for me to make money is to go on the road, or the only way to make money is to work at XYZ club in my city, and they're not friendly to women, or feeling like they hit the glass ceiling of comedy, or how many of them have worked 20 years to have the same success that a dude might in 5 or 10, so comedy is hard for everybody. Comedy is hard for white dudes. Like, it is a hard business. And it is getting better, so much better. But still, it's still not, the playing field is still not level.
And let me just jump back over to Hacks. And I it's very rare that I do interviews where we start digging into a series that is not readily available, because Hacks is HBO, but I thought it's so award-winning. And who doesn't love Jean Smart? I went and bought the DVDs. I thought, okay, if it's good, I want to keep them. And this is this very difficult conversation, this reality that Lynn is sharing with us, is the essence of Hacks. And some of it is so much more than just the discussion of the difficulty being in comedy, depicting a woman who is now in her mid-60s with this kind of Joan Rivers-ish career, long career, where she peaked kind of 25 years ago and is trying to sort of figure out how her ego adjusts and how she financially adjusts, and then a younger person. So there's this generational dialogue. And I just love how some of the more popular, acclaimed series, usually coming on streaming, gets into that. It puts it up into a generational prism. And what we need more than anything right now is to understand what the other generations are thinking, because the baby boom has got to begin stepping aside, and it is struggling to do so. That's just one more reason why Hacks it's going to become a seminal series, I think.
Agree. Shows like that are just an indicator that, like, they've got some Gen X women in the writing room who can sort of see both sides of that divide. And the women who started out in whatever job lower on the rungs of the ladder have gotten to the point where they're creating shows like Hacks and Girls Five Eva, and that are really capturing the challenge of aging, like pre-Golden Girl, like not Golden Girls quite yet, but really taking on the issue of, does a world that makes you invisible and irrelevant when you reach, God forbid, 56, maybe not 56, but you know what I mean? I feel finally like people I know are in the writer's room now, it's because things feel so relevant to me.
Listeners, when you go to the show notes of this episode, we're going to include some of the people involved in the creation and the ongoing high quality work of Hacks. Begin following their careers. That is one of the ways that we are going to continue to support each other, is to sort of get some of these very talented women and non-binary writers and emerging comics. Get them on your horizon. I think that's the minimum we can do when all we are is consumers, is support them. And they, just as much as other people, if you're trying to write a book, you have to share how many people are following you on all of your social media platforms. This is very much a metric of what their presence is, where their footprint is, and who's paying attention to their work. So I encourage you to pay attention. All right. That whole technology platform actually is a great cue then for Lynn to help us sort of understand what the state of it is today. It's a totally different game. Tell us what that game looks like.
Look, we could have done without the pandemic. We really could have done without the pandemic. Given that it happened, one of the net effects is that it continued to expand on the avenues through which people could hone their craft. We couldn't leave our houses, right? So it had us double down on, how can I be funny on Zoom? Many very talented comedians invested their time in creating characters and creating whole other ways to be funny on TikTok and Instagram, whether it was honing one character who would show up with different takes on things, or different characters. This was not invented during or because of the pandemic, but we had to lean into it. And then people couldn't necessarily go to LA to audition for things during the pandemic, you could, and I'm going to use discovered in quotes, but you could be discovered on social when producers were looking for creative people and projects in a way that was a little bit less likely before. And I'm putting discovered in quotes because an overnight success takes 10 years. It takes a lot of work. And also, so people can audition from far away, people could be found from far away, writers' rooms could be made up of people who did not already live in LA, Chicago, New York. So it really kind of erased some, not all, geographical limitations, which also means that you're like ushering in more diversity because it limited the amount to which the whole writer's room is just the guys that you did the Lampoon with. And again, this stuff like that happened before the pandemic. Samantha Bee famously for her show was one of the earliest shows to do name blind hiring. I know it was name blind, but it may also have been like, it couldn't be just like a dude handing you his dude friend's resume and being like, we were in the Hasty Pudding Club together, you know? So it limited not only bias around the color or gender of the person applying, but also the power of the status quo networks that got everyone their jobs and that by definition left out the people whose brothers didn't work on The Simpsons or whatever it was. So all of that again had started changing, but the necessities of the pandemic helped people really have to commit, whether or not it was out of an urge for diversity, they had to do it anyway. And so a lot of that, when the pandemic ended, stayed. There are just more pathways to putting your stuff out there and having it be found.
And receiving compensation.
Receiving compensation in the form of being an influencer, or who are influencers are for sure creatives, and many of them are funny. The quantity of opportunities to get yourself seen and hired is larger. Now, of course, the downside of that is that people have to work harder to find what lane works for them. In other words, people really have to figure out like, okay, who am I on TikTok? You know, what am I going to commit to? I can't be funny on all the platforms. I can't do it all. I shouldn't. I won't be funny that way. I won't work well that way. It doesn't make sense. So who's my audience? Who's my character? You also have more choices to make, like more creative choices to make than you would if you were just doing stand-up in clubs. You'd have to figure out how to hone that. But you know that, as opposed to looking at all these new and evolving platforms and being like, which one's mine and how do I maximize it? You know, it's hard. But I do still say that there are numerically more opportunities. You have to find your lane. There are more lanes, but you still have to find your lane. What really still does matter is building a community and being part of a community where you know that people are going to hype you up, recommend you, stand up for you. So getting a gig because someone knows the bartender is not necessarily a bad thing, you know, because that bartender knows you and they know you to be a great, nice person who is loyal, prompt, hardworking, indispensable. The bartender can see that how all the other comics relate to that person and that they clearly have a commanding presence, you know, whatever it is, like the old fashioned way, so to speak, of really just building a community and building your crew, which also is what Gold Comedy helps you do. Making yourself indispensable is indispensable. And that shows up in your community. And that 100% helps you.
I don't think we think of what the professional development aspect is that is necessary in any kind of entertainment, whether it's dance or acting or whatever. You can't just develop yourself in a vacuum. So the future, it sounds like, it's in a lot of flux, it feels like, and that money is available now, regardless of whether or not you've actually kind of hit the big time.
You know, there's some new pathways that are sort of outside the institutionalized pathways that we have. For example, institutions I refer to include late night hosting. We've had Samantha Bee, we've had Lily Singh, we've had Amber Ruffin, you mentioned Chelsea Handler. I think Taylor Tomlinson's show is not coming back. We just ran out of women in late night. Again, and it's 2025. Like, that is bananas. And we love the guys that we have, no shade. On the other hand, alternative pathways to the sort of, let's call it the Hollywood system, are developing themselves, where that outside streaming, outside studios, these thingamajigs that I've only recently learned about called fast channels are springing up, which also do create opportunities for creators to bypass the whole having a meeting, getting a production company, getting a showrunner, having your pilot picked up, but then never having your pilot get made, but then nothing past that, having the show get made, but then delayed, having like the cumbersome system that has frankly brought us into a golden age of television. So fast channels are free ad-supported streaming channels, old-fashioned but new-fashioned. They're just supported by ads, but they acquire content more directly. There's no big executive at the top who is greenlighting everything. They acquire content more directly from creators and their representatives. So we've actually had one of our shows, a web series that one of our teams created. The series is called Late Bloomers, just debuted on Fox Soul, which is a fast channel sort of offshoot of Fox. And we have other stuff that's coming up on Twisted Mirror Television, which is also a fast channel. And then to your point about money, will we make as much money as we would if we sold a pilot that turned out as successful as Pax? We will not. But it's a very simplified, streamlined model where they make money from ads and we get some of it. And there's so much content on these fast channels now that it's like we're all getting a small piece of the money, but like it's still the model. And we appreciate the model and the opportunity. At Gold, we have a very popular class that we teach once a quarter that it's called Build and Pitch Any Idea, where we have a producer from Broad City and Search Party and Inside Amy Schumer and a lot of other shows that you love. She also produces for stage and produces feature films, where she takes you through a rigorous step-by-step process to build your idea, whether it's for TV, web series, could be even a podcast or unscripted, into a polished industry standard pitch. Whether or not you have a pilot written doesn't matter. And that kind of pitch can go anywhere. That can go through the regular system to try to land it on Netflix or a network. So it's not like we're abandoning that or that's going away, but there's also still this sort of direct to channel that we're able to take advantage of, that where we just show them the content. They're like, we like it, we'll take it. So the now is these emerging platforms that are creator friendly. Who knows if they'll still be here in 5 years? I'm not saying they will or won't. I'm not saying good or bad. I have no clue. But for right now, they're a really interesting place for creators to get to find distribution and visibility if they can.
Well, it sounds like you're providing that valuable community that is respectful and incorporates the values of the old, everything that Joan and Tody and Phyllis taught us about how to get along in the world, particularly if you are always trying to sell your craft and work your way into bigger rooms or bigger audiences. This is a business you've been working on for how many years? How long have you been doing this?
I've been working on it for many years, and it has been evolving according to what I think makes the best business and which is also what people want. And what's become clear that people want, that our customers want, and that I think can be most successful and that I care about very deeply is finding a community and professional network where they can learn, make mistakes, make connections, introductions, get mentoring, build their skills on everything from like how to write a web series to how to do a 3-point lighting system on a set. We're doing a bunch of really nerdy sound and audio workshops coming up so that you can level up your game in that regard and make yourself indispensable as an audio person, which is, there are not that many. But what people really wanted is a place that takes them seriously. And so here in this case, I'm speaking especially about women and non-binary creators. But we do have dudes around for sure. What we promise is no bro vibe. So people are seeking a place where they could upskill and learn and build their careers in a place where they come first and really just help people in all ways. Just get to wherever the next level is for them, get to that next level.
Is there a website that kind of shares all of this capacity?
Goldcomedy.com. We work in an interesting way, which is that you pay by the year and you keep coming back. When you're a member of what we call the club, then all the classes that are offered in the club are included. All the classes, events, opportunities to collaborate, workshops, everything, it's just all included. And we have premium classes that exist parallel to that system. And they come for the classes, but then they stay for the community.
That's really cool. My last question, as we thank you for bringing your vast array of knowledge of the history, how people get their start and what they have to do just to be ready to get their start or to finally hit their mark. When you think then, and you mentioned some early TV series that you watched, which one do you think affected you the most?
I'm struggling. I was a young girl in the 70s, and I'm struggling between Carol Burnett and The Muppet Show, because Carol Burnett, for obvious reasons, the purity of her skill and talent in comedy and the ensemble that she worked with, I just inhaled it. And also Lucille Ball. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to do three. Lucille Ball and her physical comedy. I just related to both of them so much, and I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't put it this way in my head at the time, but I just related to them so much because they didn't fit like a particular standard of being a woman. They didn't like actively reject it, but like they were sloppy, they were silly, they were goofy, they were like gangly, they were, all those things. I loved high school, but I went to high school with like very tall blonde gazelles who just apparently just knew how to play lacrosse. And so I sort of formed my identity as like sort of the wacky redhead. But I do have to shout out The Muppet Show because I really appreciate good old fashioned jokes and comedy and like vaudeville style, and just the premise of like, we're going to put on a show, but also like everything's also going wrong behind the scenes. I did a show for a long time at Gotham Comedy Club in New York City based on a character that I co-created who is a superhero called Breakup Girl, who helps people with romantic emergencies. Because, we have the ones who can bend steel bars. We need one who can bend broken hearts. So like, yeah, a superhero doing a variety show is, first of all, funny to start with. But we did it just like The Muppet Show, where like a show was happening and we had fancy comedy guests and we had sketches and we had all those things. But there was also like a villain who was trying to ruin the show. So that influenced like my artistic preferences and where I gravitate in terms of humor. It's just good old fashioned funny.
3 is fine, because each one certainly brought a different value. And I think there would be a lot of people listening right now nodding, saying, yeah, I totally get that. And when I think about funny, for me personally, as now an adult, I go back to Hot in Cleveland, which I think was one of the best written, best performed series ever. And I still don't understand how it ended up on TV land and not on ABC or NBC or CBS.
I'd forgotten about that.
So I have it all on DVD because I am a physical media absolute. And it's Betty White and Wendy Malick and Valerie Bertinelli and Jane Leeves. If those 4 do not have the pedigree to get you on NBC, ABC, or CBS, then I kind of feel like I'm becoming a conspiracy theorist because there's no good answer as to why.
I mean, there is one.
Right. Anyway, that's kind of where we are, listeners. It is a lot of fun thinking about comedy. It is more fun to talk about it. And I like talking about the old ones because this is an aspect of TV where clearly the shoulders of the earliest ones gave, I mean, Tina Fey talks about just the influence of Gilda Radner. And Gilda Radner talks about her influence, or Bette Midler talks about playing backgammon with, this is totally random, but there is a video out there of Bette Midler talking about playing backgammon or Scrabble with Lucille Ball because Lucille Ball loved to play games.
That's the dream.
And that is the notion that you support, and whoever is kind of beneath you in whatever your area is, are you encouraging them enough? Are you giving them enough of your wisdom, which we would hope they want? And that's not just saying that a baby boomer wants to be listened to, but it's saying that it's good to make that available. And that's exactly what Lynn Harris is doing in the community that she's presenting with her clients and the people who follow Gold Comedy. The employers, the people who have to find the best talent, are starting to go to something like Gold Comedy and Lynn Harris because they know that, as she said, there is some accountability. These are people who really want to improve whatever it is that they do and become indispensable.
One of these days, we're going to open I don't mean a talent agency, but streamline opportunities for people to connect with our members, to hire them. If they do, it happens ad hoc for sure. Hey, do you know someone who can do sound design? Hey, do you know someone super funny who's not allergic to cats? Like whatever it is. And, we do it ad hoc all the time, but that is a piece of the business that we want to build out because it's happening.
And in the meantime, it's just simply power and access.
We are trying to absolutely develop the power and access and presence of women and non-binary and others because it matters.
How fun was that? Thanks, Lynn Harris, for spending some time with us talking about comedy. If, listeners, you want to be in the orbit of Gold Comedy, follow them on Instagram and LinkedIn. Gold Comedy, that's all you have to find, easily searchable. Thank you very much to Mary Lou Morose and Nivea Lopez for your work editing these episodes and all episodes of Advanced TV Herstory these days. Our show notes are particularly robust because Lynn and I talked about a lot of different, for the most part, known but somewhat obscure references. So, for instance, Hacks, the TV series that started in 2021 that's on HBO. You'll see some information in our show notes about Hacks. The Ellen DeGeneres episode, that's considered classic and historic. Moms Mabley, the Joan Rivers, what a prolific author. So more info about Joan. Carol Burnett actually wrote a tremendous memoir that you would appreciate and can pass along to women in your world. And lastly, the Gilda Radner episode that aired here, Advanced TV Herstory, just a couple months ago. This is why I podcast, to bring people like Lynn Harris forward to talk about women who have since passed on, but were so incredibly influential to a generation that is now actually matured, if not moving into retirement, that is making way for yet another generation. This is why I podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.